The chapel was dimly lit, its candles flickering against the old stone walls. Silence held the air like a heavy cloak, broken only by the distant creak of wooden pews settling into themselves. For years I sat in these shadows, hiding my truth in whispered prayers. Tonight, I can no longer remain silent. I have carried a secret that once consumed me, a secret that nearly destroyed my body and soul, and yet somehow I am still here, not because I was stronger than the pain, but because grace found me in the ruins. I am Sister Evelyn Grace. For decades, I have worn this habit, offered my life in service, and spoken words of hope to others. But now, I need to tell my own story, not as a lesson in holiness, but as a confession of survival. When I was a girl, I lived in a quiet town, tucked between rolling fields and the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. My family was simple, devoted, and to the outside world, we looked like the kind of household where nothing truly bad could ever happen. My father worked with honest hands, my mother guided the home with love, and my siblings filled the house with restless laughter. I was the youngest, the little sister everyone was supposed to protect. At least, that was what I believed with the innocent certainty of childhood. I thought my family was my fortress. I thought faith would always guard me. I thought trust was unshakable. But innocence is fragile. It can be shattered in a single moment. And mine was. I will not describe the cruelty in detail. Such darkness does not need to be painted with sharp edges. What I will tell you is this. The one who should have been my shield became the source of my deepest wound. My brother, whom I admired, whom I trusted, crossed a line that forever marked my soul. At first, I didn't even understand what had happened. My body knew it was wrong. My heart recoiled. But my young mind could not explain it, could not find the words. I remember looking into the mirror that night and seeing a stranger staring back my own reflection, but emptied of joy. When morning came, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. My mother hummed in the kitchen. My father left early for work. My brother smiled as though the night before had never existed. I swallowed my questions, swallowed my terror, and told no one. It was then that the silence began, silence that would last for years. I grew quieter, withdrawn. At school, I drifted to the back row, hoping no one would notice me. Teachers asked why I was slipping, why my eyes were always shadowed with tiredness, but I never spoke. At home, I wore long sleeves even in summer, as though fabric could protect me from memories that pressed against my skin. I prayed endlessly. Some nights I knelt until my knees bruised, asking God why this had happened. Was I being punished? Was I unworthy of love? I begged him to take away the shame that clung to me like a second skin. But heaven seemed silent, and the silence only deepened my despair. There is a weight that comes with carrying a secret this heavy. It bends your spine, steals your laughter, makes you believe you are no longer human but something broken, something unworthy. I was only a child, but already I felt ancient, hollowed out by grief too great for such small shoulders. Still, I hid. Still, I obeyed. Still, I smiled when neighbors asked if everything was all right at home. Inside, though, I was disappearing. And yet, even as my hope flickered, there remained a single thread, thin, trembling, but unbroken. I whispered words I barely believed. Lord, stay with me. Somehow, I knew that if I let go of that thread, I would be lost completely. I didn't know then that this thread of faith, frayed and fragile as it was, would one day pull me out of the shadows. I didn't know that one day my silence would end, and that through the ruin of my childhood, a different kind of life would be born. But that is for later. For now, you must understand how the silence began, because it is where everything else will flow from the darkness, the breaking, and, in time, the healing. The memories of my earliest years come to me like sunlight filtered through stained glass, bright, colored, and warm. Before the shadows entered my life, I was simply a little girl, in a modest American town where the church steeple was the tallest thing on the horizon and faith stitched every day together. Our family lived in a small wooden house with a porch that creaked under our feet. Summer evenings smelled of cut grass, and winters were filled with the sound of radiators clanging as though they too were trying to stay warm. My father worked with calloused hands, hauling crates for long hours, his shirt always smelling of sawdust and oil when he came home. My mother's world was softer. She hummed hymns while folding laundry, baked cornbread on Sundays, and kept the kitchen filled with the scent of coffee that seemed to soothe every worry. To the outside world, we were ordinary. To me, we were blessed. Faith was not just something we practiced on Sunday. It was the language of our household. Before each meal, we bowed our heads. Before bed, my mother traced a cross on my forehead with her fingertip. I believed angels truly guarded our windows at night, their wings brushing softly against the glass. Sundays were sacred. I remember the sound of the bells, low, solemn, yet comforting, calling us to Mass. I would walk beside my mother in my small dress, my hand tucked into hers, while my father walked ahead with steady steps. Inside the church, the stained glass windows scattered color across the pews. As sunlight passed through them, I thought heaven itself was reaching down to touch us. In those years, my laughter was easy, my trust unshaken. My older brother carried me on his shoulders through the yard. My father lifted me up so I could tie ribbons on the branches of the apple tree. My mother braided my hair and told me stories of saints who had endured great hardships but were rewarded with eternal peace. I listened wide-eyed, never imagining that suffering could one day visit my own home. Looking back, I see that innocence is not only about what we experience, but also about what we cannot yet imagine. I could not imagine cruelty living so close. I could not imagine betrayal within the walls where I prayed and slept. I could not imagine that the laughter of siblings could turn into the sound of footsteps I dreaded. But in those early years, there was only light. I would lie on the grass, watching clouds drift, believing that God painted them just for me. At school, I was eager, quick to raise my hand, always ready with an answer. Teachers praised me for my diligence. Friends shared secrets at recess, and I shared mine too, innocent secrets about which boy had pulled my braid or which hymn I liked best. There was one summer, when I was about 12, that stands out as the last, truly carefree season of my life. My father built a swing with rope and a wooden plank, tying it to the thickest branch of our old tree. I spent hours soaring back and forth, the wind lifting my hair, the world below blurring until I felt I was flying. My mother laughed at my squeals of delight, warning me not to go too high, though her eyes shone with joy at the sight of me. Even now, when I sit quietly in the convent garden, sometimes I close my eyes and imagine that swing. For just a heartbeat, I feel like that little girl again, untouched by shadows, believing that life was only as simple as the rhythm of a rope and the arc of the sky. It is important for me to remember that version of myself, because what came after was so dark, so heavy, that without those memories of light, I might believe I was born only for sorrow. But I wasn't. I had a beginning filled with love, laughter, and faith, and that makes the breaking all the more devastating. One evening, I remember it was late spring, the air heavy with the scent of lilacs. I lay in bed, the window cracked open, listening to crickets sing. My brother came into my room to say goodnight. He ruffled my hair, teased me for clutching the little wooden cross on my nightstand, and for a moment, everything still felt normal. He whispered that he would always protect me, that I was his little sister forever. I believed him. I clung to those words as if they were sacred. It is almost unbearable now, recalling how much I trusted him. But in that moment, I had no reason to doubt. So when people ask me why I didn't cry out sooner, why I didn't expose the truth at the first sign of wrong, I tell them this: because I loved him, because I trusted him. Because children believe the people closest to them are incapable of cruelty. That was the soil my innocence grew in. And that is the soil in which it was ripped out by the root. But before we descend into that valley, you must know this. I was once a child who knew laughter, who knew safety, who knew God's presence in the smallest details of life. I need you to see me that way first, because it makes the fall real. Without knowing the brightness of my childhood, you cannot understand the depth of the shadows that followed. That brightness is what I grieve even now. That is what I lost first, the easy, unquestioning innocence of a little girl who thought her family was her fortress. There comes a day when childhood ends, not with a birthday or a candle on a cake, but with a single moment that breaks everything. For me, that day arrived quietly, without warning, inside the very house where I thought I was safe. It began like any ordinary afternoon. The sunlight filtered through the kitchen curtains, painting golden stripes across the floor. I was drying dishes, humming softly to myself, when I sensed someone standing behind me. My heart gave a little leap, the kind of startled flutter you feel when you're suddenly not alone. It was my brother. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He leaned against the counter, speaking casually about how quickly I was growing, how soon I would no longer be the little one of the family. But then his voice changed low, almost strange. There was something in the way his eyes lingered on me that made my skin prickle. A shift so subtle yet so wrong that I felt my breath catch. I tried to brush it off. I laughed nervously, hoping the moment would pass. I reached for another dish, but he stepped closer, too close. His hand brushed against mine, lingering a fraction too long. My chest tightened. Something inside me screamed that this was not the brother I knew. I froze. My heart raced. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of him. The words he spoke next are etched into me even now. Simple words, but drenched in a meaning that shattered my trust. You're not a little girl anymore. I didn't fully understand, not then. But I understood enough. The safety I had always felt in his presence was gone. In its place was a terror I couldn't name, a shame I couldn't explain. When he left the room, I stood there shaking, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to tell my mother. I wanted to run to my father. But a voice inside whispered that no one would believe me. After all, wasn't he the golden son? The strong one? The one everyone trusted? That night, I locked my bedroom door for the very first time. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my wooden cross, whispering prayers until dawn. My child's mind told me that if I stayed quiet, if I prayed hard enough, maybe it would never happen again. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe tomorrow everything would return to normal. But innocence does not grow back once it's torn away. The next day, he passed me in the hallway, smiling as if nothing had changed. My parents saw nothing unusual. To them, it was just another morning. To me, it was the beginning of a nightmare I didn't yet know how to describe. Over the weeks that followed, I withdrew more and more. My laughter dimmed. I no longer skipped through the yard or sang hymns with my mother. I kept my eyes lowered, my voice quiet. At school, my teachers asked why my homework was slipping, why my smile had vanished. I shrugged, unable to speak the truth. Inside, I carried a secret I could not put into words. Each time my brother entered a room, I stiffened. Each time his footsteps echoed in the hall, my stomach twisted with dread. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to remind me that I was no longer safe. And yet I said nothing. I told myself it was my burden to carry. I told myself that if I stayed silent, my family would stay whole. I feared the explosion that might come if I spoke the truth. More than anything, I feared being blamed, being told I had imagined it, or worse, that it was somehow my fault. So I chose silence. It is difficult to explain the kind of silence that follows betrayal. It is not just the absence of words, it is the absence of self. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home, present but unseen, existing only in shadows. My innocence had been stolen, and with it, my place in the world felt uncertain. I remember one night kneeling by my bed, tears spilling onto the wooden floor, whispering again and again, "Lord, make it stop. Please, make it stop." My prayers felt heavy, as though they rose no higher than the ceiling, and yet I kept praying. It was the only rope I had to cling to as I dangled over a darkness I couldn't comprehend. In the months to come, the situation grew worse, but the details are not what matter here. What matters is that my trust was shattered, and the person who should have been my protector became the very source of my fear. That is betrayal, in its purest form. What hurt most was not only the act itself, but the silence it demanded. He would whisper threats, nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just enough to chill my blood. No one will believe you. You'll only bring shame. I believed him. I believed every poisonous word. And so the silence deepened, wrapping tighter and tighter around me like chains. Looking back now, I understand how calculated it was, how abusers thrive in secrecy, how silence is their weapon. But at 13, I didn't understand any of that. I only knew that the person I loved most had turned into a stranger, and that my world was no longer safe. This was the first betrayal. The moment the light dimmed, the moment the fortress I called family crumbled from within. It was only the beginning. After that first betrayal, life did not return to what it had been. On the outside, our household looked unchanged. My mother still humming while she cooked, my father returning tired from long days of work, neighbors greeting us with polite smiles. But for me, the world had shifted. The walls of our house felt closer, heavier, as though they were witnesses holding secrets I could never tell. Silence became my survival. Each day, I woke up determined to hide what was happening inside me. I thought if I could act normal, smile at the breakfast table, answer politely at school, sit quietly in the pew at church, then no one would see the cracks. But silence has a weight. It pressed against my chest until even breathing felt like a confession. My brother's presence became a shadow in every room. I learned to listen for his footsteps, to anticipate the creak of the stair that always gave him away. Even when he wasn't near, the dread of him lingered like a storm cloud. He had stolen not just my safety, but my sense of time itself. Every hour was measured by when he might appear, by how long I had until I could retreat to the fragile sanctuary of my locked room. School offered no relief. My teachers noticed the change. I had once been eager to learn, hands shooting up with answers, but now I slumped low in my seat, avoiding their eyes. My grades slipped from excellent to poor in a matter of months. "Evelyn, what's happened to you?" one teacher asked gently after class. I opened my mouth, but the words refused to form. Robert's threats echoed in my mind. "No one will believe you. You'll be the one blamed." I shook my head and muttered something about being tired. My friends noticed too. Once, I had laughed easily, telling jokes and sharing secrets during recess. Now I avoided them, choosing corners of the playground where I could sit alone. They whispered among themselves, puzzled by my withdrawal, but I never explained. Isolation became my armor. If I kept people away, they could not see how broken I was becoming. At home, the isolation was worse. My father's absences for work left me vulnerable, and my mother's busyness kept her distracted. My brother used every moment of opportunity to remind me of his power, not always with words, but with looks, gestures, the deliberate way he lingered too close. It was a campaign of control, and I was the captive. I remember one afternoon when my mother sent me to fetch water from the pump. My brother followed me outside. I gripped the handle so tightly my palms stung, praying silently for him to leave me in peace. He leaned close and whispered, "If you speak a word, no one will ever believe you. You'll destroy this family, and it will be your fault." His words pierced me deeper than any wound. In my young mind, they became truth. I believed him. The silence deepened. I stopped eating properly. Food turned to ash in my mouth, and my body grew thin. My mother scolded me for skipping meals, but she never guessed the real reason. At night, I shoved furniture against my bedroom door, trembling with the hope it would keep him out. Some nights it worked, some nights it didn't. The result was always the same: a child lying awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling older than her years. The prayers I whispered grew desperate. "Lord, help me. Lord, make me invisible. Lord, take this away." I begged, pleaded, sometimes shouted silently inside my head. But no answer came. Each unanswered prayer felt like proof that I was unworthy, that somehow I had caused this suffering. Shame rooted itself so deeply in me that I began to wonder if I was cursed. My mother once caught me crying in the bathroom. "What's wrong, Evelyn?" she asked, concern lining her face. The truth hovered on my lips. I wanted to scream it, to tell her everything. But then I saw his shadow pass in the hallway, and the words died in my throat. "Just a headache," I lied. She kissed my forehead, believing me, and so the silence continued. Shadows grew not only in my home but inside me. My reflection in the mirror changed. The girl who once smiled easily was gone. In her place stood a pale figure with haunted eyes, someone who carried secrets too heavy for her small frame. I cut my hair short, wore loose clothing, tried to make myself invisible. If I could disappear, maybe the pain would disappear with me. But invisibility never came. Instead, the darkness followed me everywhere. At church, where hymns once filled me with joy, I now felt nothing but emptiness. I would kneel in the pew, staring at the crucifix, wondering why Jesus had endured his suffering willingly when I would have given anything to escape mine. The sermons about forgiveness, love, and trust sounded like words from another world, beautiful but unreachable. One night, unable to sleep, I crept downstairs and opened my father's Bible. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, searching for something, anything, that might explain why this was happening. I landed on the Psalms. The words leapt from the page. "How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever?" Tears blurred my vision. Someone centuries ago had prayed the same words I was whispering now. In that moment, I felt the faintest spark of connection, not comfort, not relief, but a tiny acknowledgement that my pain was not entirely mine alone. And so, I endured. Day after day, week after week, carrying silence like a second skin. My brother's threats kept me caged. My own shame kept me mute. The shadows lengthened, and I felt myself vanishing into them. I cannot describe the full depth of that season. Not because I've forgotten, it is impossible to forget, but because some wounds are too sacred to expose in detail. What matters is this. I was a child living in fear, a prisoner inside my own home, silenced by the very people who should have protected me. That silence nearly killed me. But before it did, something would happen that forced the truth into the light. My body could not carry the weight any longer. My soul could not remain hidden forever. The silence was about to break. Silence can hold for only so long before it cracks. Mine shattered one night when my body could no longer carry what my heart had endured. It began as a sharp pain low in my stomach, a twisting ache that made it hard to stand. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I had eaten too little, or perhaps too much. But the pain grew worse, spreading like fire through my chest, until I could barely breathe. I tried to keep quiet, afraid to wake my parents, afraid of questions I couldn't answer. But then came the bleeding. I will not describe it in detail, only to say that it was frightening, sudden, and far beyond what a young girl should ever experience. My hands shook as I tried to clean myself, panic rushing through me. I collapsed on the bathroom floor, the tiles cold against my cheek. I whispered the only words I could manage. "Lord, don't let me die like this." Alma. That was when my father came home early. He was not expected until the following morning, but for reasons I can only call providence, he walked through the door that night. I heard his boots on the floorboards, his voice calling softly for me. When he found me, half-conscious, he cried out my name with a desperation I had never heard from him before. He lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing, shouting for my mother. She came running, her face blanching at the sight. I remember her hand clutching the wall for balance as my father carried me to the car. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and muffled sobs. My father kept repeating, "Stay with me, stay with me." My mother prayed aloud in broken whispers. I drifted in and out of awareness, feeling both terrified and oddly relieved. For the first time, the truth of my suffering was visible. My secret could no longer remain hidden. At the hospital, voices surrounded me. Nurses worked quickly. Doctors issued commands I could barely follow. One phrase cut through everything. "This girl has been hurt repeatedly." The words landed like thunder in the room. I saw my father's face crumple, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the bed. My mother stood frozen, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. A kind nurse held my hand, her voice gentle but steady. "Sweetheart, you're safe now. We're going to take care of you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to cling to those words, but deep inside, I knew safety was still a fragile dream. When the doctors asked what had happened, I lied. I said it was strangers, boys from outside town. I said I didn't know their names. The lie burned in my throat, but the fear of speaking the truth was greater. My brother's threats still chained me. I thought that if I told, my family would be destroyed. And I could not bear the thought of my father losing not only me, but also the son he trusted. The doctors exchanged looks, unconvinced. The social worker pressed gently. "Are you certain, child? Are you sure it wasn't someone close?" I shook my head. Tears ran down my face, but the lie remained. Silence had ruled me too long. I stayed in the hospital for several days. They gave me medicine, they bandaged what they could, but the deepest wounds could not be stitched. Each night, my father sat by my bed, holding my hand. His once steady face looked older, lined with grief. He kept whispering, "I should have been here. I should have protected you." My mother stayed too, often in a chair by the window. She would stare outside as though searching for answers in the darkness. Sometimes I caught her rocking gently, muttering, "How did I not see? How did I not know?" I wanted to tell them everything. I wanted to release the weight that had pressed me into silence. But each time I tried, fear choked me. My brother's words haunted me. "No one will believe you. You'll ruin us all." So I lied again. I told the same story to the police strangers, nameless boys. They wrote it down, but I could see in their eyes that they did not believe me. I could see in my father's eyes that he did not believe me either. He pressed his lips tight, his jaw clenched, and I knew he was already searching for the truth. And still, I remained silent. When I returned home, everything felt changed. My father had put a new lock on my bedroom door and pressed the key into my hand. "No one enters unless you allow it," he said firmly. His eyes brimmed with both love and sorrow. I nodded, clutching the key like a lifeline. But safety cannot be built with wood and metal alone. The real prison was inside me. Nights became my battleground. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, nightmares tore it apart. I woke screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced I heard footsteps outside my door. My father would rush in, holding me, rocking me like I was a little girl again. "You're safe, Evelyn. Nothing can hurt you now." But I didn't believe it. Not yet. The breaking point had come. The silence was fractured, though not fully destroyed. The truth was leaking out in fragments in my father's suspicion, in my mother's haunted eyes, in the doctor's notes locked away in hospital files. I didn't know it then, but the day was coming when the truth could no longer be contained. And when it finally broke into the light, it would change everything. The weeks after the hospital felt like walking on cracked glass. Every step in our home carried tension. My father's questions grew sharper, my mother's silences heavier, and my brother's eyes colder. The air itself seemed to hum with secrets, as though the walls were waiting to speak what I could not. I tried to return to ordinary routines, school, chores, prayers, but ordinary life had already been lost. My teachers still asked why my work was slipping, why I stared out the window with vacant eyes. I had no answers. At home, my father watched me constantly, as though afraid I would vanish if he looked away. My mother tried to cook favorite meals, tried to braid my hair like when I was small, but I could see the question burning behind her eyes. "What really happened to you?" I avoided the truth, clinging to my lie about strangers. But the lie was fragile, and I could see it crumbling each time my father studied me with that fierce, protective gaze. He wanted names, places, anything that would allow him to hunt down the faceless boys I had invented. Each time he pressed, I looked away, trembling under the weight of what I could not say. My brother grew restless. He knew the silence could not last forever. I remember one evening when he cornered me in the living room, his voice low and sharp. "If you ever tell, you'll ruin everything. Dad will kill us, and it will be your fault. Do you want that on your conscience?" His eyes burned with hatred, but beneath it I saw fear. He was losing control, and he knew it. It was then that I found a spark of courage I didn't know I possessed. I pulled my arm free and whispered, "You don't scare me anymore." The words came out shaky, but they were mine, and for a brief moment I felt taller, stronger. What happened next unfolded like a storm. My father walked into the room, carrying papers he had collected from the hospital. His face was pale, his jaw set. He had read the doctor's notes, the truth written in cold medical language. He looked first at me, then at my brother, and something in his expression broke open. "Tell me it isn't true," he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. My brother stammered, tried to deny, tried to twist the story, but I could see the end of my silence had come. My father's eyes were on me, pleading, desperate. "Evelyn, daughter, tell me the truth." I could no longer bear the weight. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "It was him." The words cracked the world in two. My father staggered back as though struck. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. My brother's face drained of color, his mask of arrogance slipping into panic. The living room erupted. My father's fury, long restrained, poured out like fire. He lunged at my brother, shouting words I had never heard from his mouth. My mother screamed, trying to pull him back. Furniture toppled, neighbors rushed in at the sound of chaos, and within minutes, police were at our door. I remember the officer kneeling in front of me, his voice steady but kind. "Evelyn, you need to tell us everything. We can't help you if you stay silent." And so I did. At last I spoke. The truth poured out like a flood I could no longer contain, every threat, every fear, every moment of betrayal. My voice shook, but once it began, I could not stop. The officers listened in grim silence. My mother sobbed uncontrollably. My father, held back by neighbors, stared at my brother with a look I will never forget, rage, grief, and something deeper. The devastation of a man whose family had fractured beyond repair. That night, my brother was taken away. The sight of him in handcuffs burned itself into my memory. He looked at me once, his expression a mix of hatred and terror. I turned away. I had no strength left for him. In the days that followed, our house became a hushed battlefield. My father could barely speak without his voice breaking. He repeated the same words over and over. "I should have seen. I should have protected you." My mother fell into despair, sometimes lying in bed for hours, sometimes pacing as though searching for answers that would never come. The fracture spread beyond our walls. Neighbors whispered. The town speculated. Headlines appeared in the local paper, painting our tragedy in bold letters. I became the girl who was betrayed, no longer simply Evelyn. Pity and curiosity followed me wherever I went. At school I felt eyes on me in every hallway. Some avoided me, as though trauma were contagious. Others looked at me with such pity that I wanted to vanish. I ate lunch alone, walked home quickly, and prayed that someday people would stop staring. But inside the convent school chapel, I found something different. One afternoon, unable to bear the whispers any longer, I slipped inside and knelt in the back pew. The stained glass light bathed the floor, and for the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of peace. "Lord," I whispered, "I can't carry this anymore. It's too heavy. Please, help me." I didn't hear an answer, but I felt something, a quiet presence, as though God himself sat beside me in the silence. That presence did not erase the fracture, but it reminded me I was not alone within it. My family would never be the same. The house that once rang with laughter had become a place of grief and suspicion. My parents, broken in different ways, tried to comfort me but could barely comfort themselves. I watched my father pace the yard at night, fists clenched, whispering prayers mixed with curses. I watched my mother stare at photographs of happier times, tears slipping down her face. The fracture was total. The family I had once trusted was gone. But out of that fracture came one undeniable truth. The silence was broken. The wound was exposed. And though the light was harsh and painful, it was also the beginning of something new. I did not know it then, but from that night forward, my journey toward healing had begun. After my brother was taken away, our house became unbearably quiet. The silence that once hid my suffering now carried an entirely different weight. The silence of shame, of broken trust, of neighbors whispering through thin walls and over garden fences. My father walked with his shoulders bowed, as though the world had doubled in weight. My mother drifted through the house like a ghost, tending to chores mechanically but never meeting my eyes. Every corner seemed haunted, not just by what had been done, but by what could never be undone. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Whenever I went into town, I could feel the eyes of others on me. Some looked with pity, others with suspicion, and a few with something worse, curiosity, as if my pain were gossip for their entertainment. I overheard whispers, "That's the girl, the one from that family." Each word cut deep, reminding me that my private wounds had become public knowledge. It became clear I could not stay. One evening, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. His hands, rough from work, trembled as he folded them together. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you deserve a place where you can heal. Here, the stairs, the whispers, they won't let you rest. I've spoken with Father Michael. The convent school has agreed to take you in. You'll be safe there." My first reaction was fear. Leave home? Leave my parents? The thought terrified me. Yet beneath the fear was also relief. Perhaps away from the shadows of that house, I could breathe again. A week later, with only a small suitcase of clothes and my worn wooden cross, I left. My mother hugged me tightly at the door, her tears soaking into my shoulder. "Forgive me," she whispered. I should have seen. I should have known. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me longed to comfort her, but another part was still too wounded, too uncertain. I only nodded and kissed her cheek. My father drove me to the convent school in silence. His grip on the steering wheel was tight, his jaw clenched. As we approached the gates, he finally spoke. "I failed you," he said, his voice raw. "But I will not fail you again. You are my daughter, and you will rise from this. I promise." Tears blurred my vision as I squeezed his hand. The convent stood tall, its stone walls weathered but strong, a place of discipline and devotion. The nuns who greeted me wore gentle smiles. Their eyes held no judgment, only a quiet steadiness that I found both intimidating and comforting. They welcomed me into their world of prayer, study, and structure. At first, I resisted. Nights in the dormitory were lonely. I missed the sound of my mother's voice, even in its sorrow. The regimented schedule bells ringing for prayer, lessons, chores felt rigid compared to the chaos I had left. I often lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had simply traded one kind of prison for another. But gradually, something shifted. The nuns did not press me with questions about my past. They gave me space, allowing silence when I needed it. Sister Margaret, who taught literature, would sometimes sit with me in the garden after class. She spoke not of what I had endured, but of stories, poems, and parables. She once placed a hand on mine and said, "Child, words can wound, but they can also heal. Let them be your refuge." I began writing in a small journal she gave me. At first only fragments, broken prayers, half-formed thoughts, sketches of memories I couldn't yet say aloud. Slowly, those fragments became sentences, and those sentences became a way to release what I had held inside for so long. In the chapel, too, I found moments of peace. The chants of evening prayer, the glow of candles against stone, the rhythm of voices lifting together, it soothed me. I still carried anger, doubt, and shame, but the prayers of the sisters wrapped around me like a blanket. Even when I could not find words of my own, theirs carried me. For the first time in years, I felt a hint of refuge. Of course, healing was not sudden. There were nights when nightmares dragged me back into terror, when I woke gasping, clutching my cross. There were days when the whispers of students, some curious, some cruel, cut into me like knives. There were moments when I wanted to run away altogether, to vanish into a world where no one knew my name. But each time I faltered, there was someone to steady me. A sister offering a kind word. A teacher encouraging me. A fellow student slipping me a note that simply said, "You're not alone." Those small mercies kept me going. Looking back, I see that exile was necessary. Leaving home tore me from the ashes of my family's fracture, placing me in soil where something new could grow. It was not easy. It was not painless. But it was the beginning of a different kind of life. When my father visited months later, I hardly recognized him. His hair had gone grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "You look stronger," he said, pride and sorrow mingling in his voice. I told him about my studies, about my writing, about the moments of peace I was beginning to feel. He smiled, tears glistening, and whispered, "God is not finished with you yet, daughter." Exile had taken me from the house of shadows. Refuge had placed me among women who taught me that brokenness does not have to be the end. It can be the soil of transformation. I didn't know then that these first fragile steps of refuge would one day grow into a vocation, into a calling that would define the rest of my life. For now, all I knew was this: the silence had ended, the truth had fractured my world, and though I carried scars, I was still here, still breathing, still searching for healing. And slowly, ever so slowly, I was beginning to find it. Healing never comes like a sunrise bright, immediate, washing everything in light. It comes more like the slow turning of seasons, almost unnoticed at first, until one day you realize the snow has melted and green shoots are breaking through the earth. My years at the convent became that slow thawing, each small act of kindness and each prayer whispered in the chapel planting seeds I didn't yet know were growing. At first, I still lived in survival. I jumped at sudden sounds, avoided certain corridors where footsteps echoed too loudly, and often woke in the night drenched in fear. The sisters never scolded me for these things. They simply carried on beside me, their presence calm and unwavering. In their patience, I began to glimpse what safety looked like, not the absence of pain, but the presence of love that expected nothing in return. Sister Margaret continued to encourage my writing. She told me, "Every time you put pen to paper, you reclaim a piece of yourself." I filled journal after journal, spilling out not just memories of sorrow, but also prayers, questions, even small fragments of hope. Some pages were smudged with tears, others with ink, pressed so hard the words nearly cut through the paper. But all of them were mine, my voice, finally free after years of silence. In the classroom, I rediscovered my hunger for learning. At first it was shaky, as though I feared being noticed again. But the sisters praised my diligence, never with pressure, always with gentleness. I began raising my hand, answering questions, rediscovering the girl who once loved to learn. That girl had been buried, but she wasn't gone. One pivotal moment came during a retreat the sisters organized. We were asked to spend an afternoon alone in silence, reflecting in nature. I found myself sitting under an old oak tree, its branches spreading wide like protective arms. For a long time, I simply stared at the bark, tracing its ridges with my eyes. Then, without planning to, I whispered aloud, "I am not what he did to me." The words startled me. They felt foreign on my tongue, as though someone else had spoken them through me. Yet once spoken, I couldn't take them back. I repeated them again, louder this time. "I am not what he did to me." With each repetition, I felt the chains of shame loosen a little more. That day, beneath the branches of that oak, I began to separate my identity from my wounds. Of course, healing did not mean forgetting. There were still days when memories swept over me like cold waves, pulling me under. On those days, I would find Sister Margaret or Sister Anne in the chapel, and without asking, they would sit beside me in silence. They never demanded words I couldn't give. Their presence alone reminded me I wasn't fighting the darkness alone. One night, during evening prayer, I found myself staring at the crucifix above the altar. For years I had looked at it with confusion, even anger. Why would a loving God allow such suffering? But that night, something shifted. I didn't see only the agony of the cross. I saw the love that chose to endure it. I realized Christ knew what it was to be betrayed, to be abandoned, to be broken. My suffering was not foreign to him. He had carried it too. Tears fell silently as I whispered, "You understand. You know." For the first time, prayer didn't feel like words thrown into an empty sky. It felt like a conversation with someone who truly saw me. The sisters began giving me small responsibilities, helping in the kitchen, reading scripture aloud during services, mentoring younger students. At first, I felt unworthy, but each task reminded me I still had something to offer. My voice, once silenced, was now being trusted again. Slowly, I began to see myself not as a victim hiding in shadows, but as a young woman who had survived, who had something to give. There was one student, younger than me, who often cried herself to sleep. One night I went to her bedside and whispered, "You're safe here. You're not alone." She clutched my hand until she drifted off. I lay awake afterward, stunned by what had happened. For years I had longed for someone to whisper those words to me. Now I had spoken them to another. In that moment, I realized that healing is not only for ourselves, it ripples outward, offering light to others who still stumble in darkness. Letters from my parents came now and then. My father wrote with steady, protective words, "I'm proud of you. Keep going. You are stronger than you know." My mother's letters were softer, filled with apologies and prayers. I didn't always know how to respond, but I treasured the proof that they had not abandoned me, even in their brokenness. By the time I was nearing adulthood, I could look back and see how far I had come. The nightmares still visited, but less often. The shame still whispered, but more faintly. In its place, a different voice was growing, the voice of faith, of resilience, of a young woman beginning to believe she could live beyond her pain. Those were the seeds of healing. They didn't erase what had been done, but they began to transform it. Like a scar that never fully disappears, my wounds remained. But a scar is proof not only of injury, but of survival. I carried those seeds with me, uncertain where they would lead. What I didn't yet know was that they would grow into a calling far greater than I could imagine, a life given fully to God, not as an escape from my past, but as a way of transforming it into hope for others. But that part of my story was still to come. For now, I was simply learning to breathe again, to laugh again, to pray without bitterness, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was more than my pain. By the time I reached young adulthood, the convent was no longer just a place of refuge. It had become a home, a sanctuary where I slowly discovered who I was meant to be. What began as exile had turned into belonging. The seeds planted in silence and sorrow had taken root, and their growth led me somewhere I never expected. A vow, a calling, a life given fully to God. The decision did not come in a single moment. It unfolded gradually, like dawn breaking. Little glimpses of light that, over time, revealed the path in front of me. It began with service. The sisters encouraged us not only to study and pray, but also to give our time, our talents, our compassion. At first, I volunteered reluctantly, afraid of being seen. But when I began helping at the small parish food pantry, something stirred inside me. I remember one afternoon clearly. A woman came in with 3 small children clinging to her skirts. Her eyes were weary, her face lined with hardship. As we handed her bags of bread and vegetables, she looked at me and whispered, "God bless you." The gratitude in her eyes was so raw, so unguarded, that I felt tears rising in my own. For the first time, I saw how love, even in the smallest act, could bring light into someone else's darkness. That experience ignited something. I began seeking out ways to serve, visiting the sick, tutoring younger students, even scrubbing floors alongside the sisters. Each task, no matter how simple, felt meaningful. It was as though the pieces of my brokenness were being reassembled into a new shape, one designed not just to survive, but to give. But even as I found purpose, doubts haunted me. Could someone as wounded as I was truly devote herself to God? Could He really use someone who had been broken so deeply? Those questions circled in my prayers again and again. One evening, unable to sleep, I slipped into the chapel. The candles flickered softly, casting golden halos on the stone walls. I knelt before the crucifix, my heart heavy with uncertainty. "Lord," I whispered, "you know everything. You know where I've come from. You know the pain I've carried. Tell me, how can someone like me serve you? How can someone so broken belong to you?" For a long while, there was silence. Then, not in words but in a deep stirring, I felt an answer rise within me. "Because you are broken, You understand the broken. Because you have suffered, you can sit with those who suffer. Because you have been wounded, you can carry my healing to others. Tears streamed down my face. For years I had begged God to erase my scars. That night I understood. He was not asking me to erase them, but to offer them, to let them become vessels of compassion, bridges of empathy, tools of grace. That realization became the seed of my calling. Over the next months, the sense of vocation grew stronger. The sisters noticed it too. Sister Margaret pulled me aside one afternoon in the garden. "Evelyn," she said gently, "have you considered that perhaps God is inviting you into this life?" I hesitated. "But I'm not worthy," she smiled softly. "None of us are worthy. That's the point. We say yes not because we are perfect, but because we are willing." Her words echoed in my heart long after she walked away. Willing. Was I willing? Yes. Trembling, uncertain, still scarred, but willing. When the time came to formally discern, I entered into prayer and counsel with the sisters. The process was not easy. I wrestled with my fears, with memories that still haunted me, with the question of whether I was strong enough for such a life. But each time I prayed, each time I listened, the same quiet assurance returned. This is where I want you. This is how I will use your life. The day of my first vows is etched into me forever. I wore a simple white dress, my hair covered by a veil. As I walked into the chapel, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the floor. My parents were there, my father standing tall, though his eyes were wet, my mother clutching a handkerchief, her face a mixture of grief and pride. I knelt before the altar, my hands trembling as I spoke the words. Vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But to me, they were more than vows. They were a declaration that my life no longer belonged to fear, to shame, or to the wounds of my past. It belonged to God, fully and forever. When I rose, the sisters surrounded me, their voices lifting in song. I felt wrapped in a love that was not of this world. For the first time, I did not feel defined by what had been taken from me. I felt defined by what I was giving my whole heart, my whole life, into hands far greater than mine. That day, I became Sister Evelyn Grace. The name itself felt like a rebirth. Evelyn, the name I had always carried, now joined with Grace, the gift I had been given freely, though I never deserved it. Together, they told my story. The child who had suffered, the woman who had been remade, the nun who now lived by grace. Giving my life to God did not erase my past, but it transformed it. My scars remained, but they no longer bound me. Instead, they became part of my offering, a testimony that even in the darkest of nights, light can break through and brokenness can be made holy. When I look back over the years, the shadows of childhood, the silence that nearly crushed me, the night the truth fractured my family, and the slow, painful path of healing, I see more than a story of sorrow. I see a testimony, a living witness that even in the darkest corners of life, hope can take root. As Sister Evelyn Grace, I have devoted my life to carrying that hope into the lives of others. My days are filled with prayer, service, and community. I teach, I counsel, I listen. But more than anything, I bear witness because I know what it feels like to be unseen, unheard, silenced by fear. When young women come to the convent burdened by their own pain, I sit with them in their silence. I do not push them to speak before they are ready. I offer the same patience the sisters once gave me, and when their voices finally emerge, trembling but true, I remind them, "You are not what was done to you. You are more." Those words are not theory. They are my life. There are days when old memories still rise like unwelcome waves. But now, instead of drowning, I let them wash through me, knowing they no longer hold power over me. My scars remain, yes, but they have become holy scars, reminders not of defeat but of survival, of grace, of a God who can take even brokenness and weave it into something beautiful. I often think of my father. He carried his own guilt for years, yet in his later days he told me something I hold close. "Evelyn, your strength has healed more than yourself. It has healed me too." My mother, too, found peace before her passing. We never erased the fracture in our family, but we found a way to live with it, to let love mend what it could. Even that imperfect healing was a gift. In the chapel where I now serve, I sometimes stand before a group of girls, their faces filled with questions, doubts, and dreams. I tell them pieces of my story, not all the details, but enough to let them know that I understand suffering, that I have walked through shadows. I tell them that silence nearly killed me, but truth set me free. I tell them that God does not discard the broken. He transforms them. And when I see their eyes light up with recognition, when I see hope flicker where despair once lived, I know why I was called. My life was never meant to end in tragedy. It was meant to become a channel of grace. There is one phrase I return to often in prayer. What was meant for harm, God has turned for good. Those words are not easy. They do not erase the pain, nor do they excuse the harm. But they remind me that the evil I endured does not have the final word. God does. I have given my life to God, but not as an escape. I did not become a nun to hide from the world. I became a nun to step fully into it, to be present with those who suffer, to bring the same presence of love that once saved me. My vocation is not about retreat. It is about testimony. Sometimes late at night I walk the convent grounds in silence. The stars stretch wide above me, the same stars I once gazed at as a frightened child, praying for rescue. I breathe in the cool air and whisper, "Thank you." Not because my past was easy, not because it was fair, but because even in the ruin God was there. He carried me when I could not carry myself. And now, as long as I have breath, I will carry that light into the lives of others. If you are listening to my story now, if you carry wounds that no one else can see, if you feel silenced by shame or crushed by betrayal, hear this. You are not alone. Your life is not defined by what was done to you. There is more. There is healing, even if it comes slowly. There is hope, even if you cannot see it yet. I know, because I have lived it. My brother once destroyed my innocence, but I gave my life to God, and in His hands, my story has become more than pain. It has become a living testimony, a reminder that the darkest nights cannot extinguish the dawn, and that even the most shattered lives can become instruments of hope. This is who I am now, not just a survivor, not just a nun, but a witness, one voice among many testifying that love is stronger than fear, that grace is deeper than shame, and that God's light shines brightest through the cracks of our brokenness. And as long as I live, I will keep telling this story, not because it is mine alone, but because it belongs to everyone who needs to hear that brokenness is not the end.